According to Daily Mail article, New York State is ranked the worst in the country for economic outlook. Study finds as businesses begin to flee amid fears it will take years to recover from the pandemic and widespread protests. New York has lost well over 300 billion. I believe, according to as of August 5th, according to Bloomberg, that New York has lost an estimate of 336 billion, roughly about 13% from past years in terms of their overall revenue for the state. That is a huge amount of money that they will never be able to recoup in anytime soon. While the state is roughly around 60, 65, 66 billion in debt as of some of the latest news, which of course why there's so much talk of always pointing back to Donald Trump. When you're incompetent at what you do and you don't want to admit and you don't want people to realize how incompetent you are, you always point to someone else, which is why you often hear of Cuomo pointing back to Donald Trump. Now, of course, every time you look at a news article, it's always published, that this is as a result of the coronavirus. As we can see, according to some of the latest economic materials stating New York State unemployment paying far worse than the nation's in lagging pandemic recovery. The city's unemployment rate remains worse than around 16%, more than twice the U.S. average. The latest numbers show, of course, as you've seen, restaurants, hotels, obviously Broadway, theaters are all shut down. And as a result of that, of course, all of that bleeds jobs. And then, of course, more people end up going on some form of unemployment. And of course, people always want to point to the coronavirus as the reason why Cuomo does such a shit job. But yet when you look at other states, like, for example, the Republican state of Florida, Florida's unemployment rate dropped 0.7% to 6.5 in October, according to statistics released by the state on Friday. The jobless rate was 3.6% points higher than last year. But it says the state's unemployment rate was slightly lower than the national average of 6.9. And so as much as people want to point to the reason why Governor Cuomo and the state of New York is in such a shitty state is because of the coronavirus. Everything is always blamed on the coronavirus. Yet we know that Florida is also, of course, experiencing the exact same pandemic as New York. The difference is in the person of who is leading it. One decided to shut down his state completely, driving out businesses. The other decided, you know what? The pandemic cannot be worse than what's going to happen, right? The economic downfall of the state cannot be left worse than, of course, than the pandemic, as we've seen with jobless numbers. Crime in New York has, of course, surged. And of course, Cuomo at one point was actually discussing, and most of the lawmakers, as it says here, they were considering keeping their 2021 raises. It says, and of course, this was as of May. Amid coronavirus bailout talk, Cuomo and state lawmakers have kept 40 to 60% pay raises. So for 2021, most of these individuals, of course, were expected to receive some sort of a pay raise. And when you think about the sorry state that New York is in, right? When you look at the private sector, in terms of how much value you bring to the company, of course, will increase your ability to earn a heftier salary. If you're more valuable to the person that you work for, they are more likely to want to shell out extra money to keep you because you're so valuable to the company. You generate so much revenue for the company that you can make deals and negotiate. I want a higher salary. I want more vacation. I want more time off. I want stock options, etc. Because you do so good a job. But whatever it is, I mean, even if you're someone who works in a small business, small businesses look at it the exact same way. If you have an employee who shows up on time, who's reliable, who does a fantastic job, that is really good at what they do, and as a result, they start to bring in more customers to your place of business, when that person hits you up for a raise, you are less likely to want to get rid of that person because you know of the economic impact that it will have upon your business. But yet, Governor Cuomo, amid the sorry state of the state, actually was considering keeping the 25 extra thousand, whereas as of course of Newsbreak says, Governor Cuomo's 25K raise would make him the highest paid governor. And when you look at the state of New York being labeled as the worst state economically speaking, when you look at a state that has lost well over 3 billion in terms of revenue, which of course means that there will be large amounts of job cuts. When you look at the unemployment just in the city of New York alone, do you imagine that from a business perspective that this man is worth the money that he's being paid? Do you think that he should be ranked as the #1 paid governor? Of course not. I would expect a governor like the governor in Florida, DeSantis, to be worth more than this man right here, as he is bleeding. Him and the people who work for him are literally bleeding the state dry of revenue, and they're driving out businesses, all for the purpose of course, blaming everything on Donald Trump. Everything is Donald Trump's fault. When he decides to send patients to the nursing home, even though Donald Trump sent him that huge ship that he could have utilized and put all of those sick elderly patients on a ship that was manned primarily by the military, he chose not to do that. Instead, he chose to send them right back. There's literally no information that shows that things like gyms or restaurants are responsible for spreading coronavirus, yet we see numerous restrictions. We see very similar restrictions in California, ironically both led by Democrats, and yet people still want to look to these individuals as my source of salvation. And of course, these individuals will lead you only into destruction. It's really sad to see that there isn't a much larger outcry in the state of New York, as many people really don't understand that New York is literally just getting started in terms of its economic downfall. When you look at Black Friday in New York, Black Friday, that for many economists was basically like the litmus test, right? And so when you look at Black Friday in New York, it was devastating to the local economy, as it sees, what is it, 50%? I think it was a 50%, as it's called. New York Post, Black Friday is a bust in NYC, and of course it's always blamed on the coronavirus. There's roughly around 50% decline in, of course, in-person shopping. And most of that money, of course, went to online, things like Amazon, which of course are already making money hand over fist. And primarily what you see is a lot of people, obviously you have huge unemployment, which means people don't have money to go out shopping, which means you can't stimulate the economy. And then of course too is that people are afraid, because every single day Governor Cuomo goes onto Twitter, onto YouTube, onto TV, and he keeps telling people to be afraid, always pointing back to Donald Trump, that he is responsible, even though there is supposedly a vaccine that is going to save everybody. And then he goes on TV and says, oh, we're not even, if Donald Trump is in charge of the vaccine, we're not even going to administer it. Regardless of what the economic impact will be to his state, realistically speaking, he doesn't care, because he draws his salary first before whether or not you can get paid, whether or not you get a stimulus check. It's irrelevant, because he already draws a salary. There's no one there saying, we're going to cut you, you're not going to get paid for this week, or we're cutting your salary, etc. And this is the result of when you vote for this, all you get is more of it. And it's for this very reason, back in April, Donald Trump said that he was not going to bail out many of these Democratic states. Back in April, New York Post says Trump dismisses bailouts for poorly run states led by Democrats. And this is obvious from a taxpayer perspective. Why should the whole country, in terms of the taxpayers, why should the entire taxpayer base be utilized to bail out poorly run states like New York? And for very good reason, as they are poorly run. The individuals who are elected to run them have no idea how to run a state from an economic perspective, from an economic and legislative perspective. And the result is that they do such a poor job that they run the state into the ground. So obviously when Donald Trump says that it's not fair for the country and for Republicans to bail these individuals out, why should they? We do this every day We do this every day. You probably do this with your children. When your children mismanage their money, we know that if you just keep giving your kids money and they don't know how to manage their money, they never learn. And as a result, they just keep coming back to you for more and more money. And when you bail out your kids from their youth on, they end up becoming adults who need to be bailed out as well. And this is exactly what is happening, of course, here in New York. The governor of New York, along with the mayor of New York, have no idea how to run a state and should be removed in favor of businessmen who understand how to economically stimulate an economy and do not use every opportunity to politically point at the president just for the sake of trying to blame them for their own incompetence.